Have you ever felt like you're just passing through? Not in the rushed sense of modern life, but in something more subtle, almost imperceptible. As if the scenes around you, the everyday dramas, the conversations that once held your attention, now feel like part of an old movie whose ending you already know. And yet, you watch with a certain detachment, with a kind of quiet peace you can't always explain. Have you ever felt like you're here for the last time? As if you've lived enough, experienced enough, and now you're just observing? Not with weariness, but with serenity. As if your soul has stopped searching and started to withdraw. Like the leaves that fall in autumn, not because they're sick, but because the cycle has completed. Maybe this isn't just a feeling. Maybe you really are living your last incarnation. What if this is your final dance here on Earth? And what if the signs aren't written in the stars, but in the small things you no longer tolerate, no longer desire, no longer chase? In this video, we're going to explore that possibility together. No doctrines, no absolute truths, only open eyes and an attentive heart. We'll walk through the silent, practical, almost invisible signs that often appear when a soul no longer needs to learn through suffering, haste, or competition. We're not talking about extraordinary gifts or mystical powers. We're talking about everyday feelings you might already be sensing. The exhaustion of having to be. The discomfort with the superficial. The lightness of no longer needing to win. Each of these small realizations may be the echo of something greater. The final calling of a soul that is completing its cycle. This video is an invitation, not to believe, but to feel. To allow yourself to contemplate the possibility that maybe, just maybe, you're already living the most subtle and beautiful farewell of your existence. Because when the soul is ready to leave, it doesn't shout. It whispers. And it's in those whispers that we'll now dive into. You are not a drop in the ocean. You are the entire ocean in a drop. Most people expect spiritual awakening to arrive like a flash. An epiphany, a mystical event, a rupture from the world that suddenly changes everything. But for many old souls, it doesn't come with fireworks. It arrives with silences. It's like waking up in a room where the lights don't switch on all at once, but where the sun slips in gently through the cracks in the window, slowly revealing everything. You keep living the same routine, but something deep down has changed. The same conversations, the same people, the same places. But now, something inside you responds differently. Not with boredom, not with anger, with quiet understanding, with that barely visible smile of someone who's seen this episode before. It's the beginning of the end, not of life, but of the need to cling to it. You start to notice that you no longer get irritated so easily, that you no longer need to win arguments, because you realize that being right is rarely more valuable than having peace. You hear someone complaining with intensity, and something inside you simply observes without entering the storm, not out of coldness, but out of wisdom. This is the silent awakening. It happens in the heart of those who have already lived the extremes. The insatiable search for answers, the pain of loss, the ego screaming for recognition, the fear of failure, the desire for control. And then one day, you simply grow tired. But it's not a physical tiredness. It's existential, not of the world, but of the theater. The mask no longer fits. The script no longer moves you. The audience no longer matters. You still take part in the play, but with the lightness of someone who knows the curtain will fall. And that's okay, because this is no longer a stage for shining. It's a setting for learning how to say goodbye in peace. Everything that has a beginning has an end, said an old sage. And for those in this silent awakening, the end is no longer a reason for sadness. It's relief. Imagine a bird that spent lifetimes trying to fly against the wind. And now, for the first time, it opens its wings, not to fight, but to glide gently, accepting the wind's direction as part of the journey. That's the feeling. You look back and no longer feel guilt. You look ahead and no longer feel urgency. You look within and find silence. But not the silence of emptiness. The silence of presence. The silence of someone who no longer needs to prove anything. It's at this point that many realize, something in me is closing a cycle. And it's not just any cycle, it's the last one. That serenity which once felt so rare, now feels almost constant. Not because everything is perfect, but because, finally, you no longer need it to be. When the ego is silent, the soul whispers. Eckhart Tolle. Point in the journey, almost all of us have felt that urge to prove something. To prove that we're good enough. To prove that we can do it. To prove that we deserve it. For a long time, life felt like a race, filled with goals, comparisons, applause, invisible trophies. But then, without warning, something changes. The desire to compete simply fades. You look at the world around you, the battles for space, recognition, status, and ask yourself, for what? Not with superiority, but with a deep weariness of playing a game that no longer holds any joy. The promotion at work that once seemed like the ultimate goal now feels like an invitation to more stress. The urge to be the best at something gives way to the desire to simply be whole. And success, the kind we were taught to chase, starts to feel more like a prison than a prize. This is one of the clearest signs that the soul is closing a cycle. Because it has already danced all the ego's dances. It has already been the lead and the supporting role. It has had, it has lost, it has wanted, and it has grown tired. Now all it longs for is peace. You start to admire those who live with lightness more than those who accumulate achievements. You begin to let go of opportunities that drain you. And most of all, you stop measuring yourself by someone else's ruler. The curious thing is that, on the outside, it may look like giving up. But on the inside, it's freedom. You no longer need to win to feel worthy, because you realize, clearly, that you already are. Already enough. Already whole. Already, finally, free from the need to prove anything at all. This detachment from competition is not apathy, it's spiritual maturity. It's the understanding that there's no such thing as arriving first when we're all headed to the same place. And the most beautiful part, you begin to celebrate the victories of others, sincerely, because the ego has stepped aside and only the heart remains. The flower does not compete with the one next to it. It just blooms. There was a time when any conversation filled the silence, when noise felt like company and chatter was a sign of belonging. But when the soul begins to near the end of its journey, what once was enough now becomes draining. Talks about the weather, daily gossip, shallow opinion battles, all of it starts to feel heavy. Not because you think you're better, but because something within you is no longer nourished by it. It's like trying to quench thirst with salt water. You find yourself avoiding social interactions, not out of shyness or arrogance, but due to a subtle, almost invisible exhaustion. The body is present, but the heart is distant. Because you know that being among people doesn't always mean being in connection. Superficiality begins to hurt. Words said out of habit, empty compliments, forced laughter, all of it disconnects you. And what once felt like a mild discomfort now sounds like dissonance. Your frequency no longer matches noisy spaces of ego. You seek less crowd and more truth. If before you tolerated conversations just to keep up appearances, now you prefer silence. Because at least silence is honest. When someone speaks from the heart, you feel it. Your eyes light up, your soul softens. You recognize the value of vulnerability, of deep listening, of the pause between words. And slowly your social life changes. Not from isolation, but from natural selection. You begin to gravitate toward people with whom you can be whole, even in silence. Those who know how to look you in the eye, who respect the rhythm of speech, who aren't afraid to dive deep, because your soul no longer seeks distraction. It longs for encounters. Encounters of essence. Encounters where presence matters more than opinion. Encounters that heal even when nothing is said. And the most curious thing is, in these deep encounters, words often become unnecessary. A glance is enough. A gentle smile. Or simply the comfort of knowing, here I can just be. Speak only if your words are more beautiful than silence. Sufi proverb. For a long time, consuming was mistaken for living. Buying, acquiring, collecting were seen as synonyms of progress. As if the more we accumulated, the more complete we became. But for a soul that is reaching the end of its cycle, accumulation loses its charm. There's no more sparkle in excess. No more desire in having. You look at shop windows, ads, new releases, and nothing draws you in. Not from lack of taste, but from a lack of inner need. It's as if the pleasure of consumption has been replaced by a different longing. Lightness. Lightness of space, of schedule, of mind. Lightness of carrying only what matters. You realize that the objects that once defined you now just take up space. And little by little, you begin letting them go. Not with sadness, but with relief. Fewer clothes, fewer accessories, fewer trinkets. And more visual silence, more breathing room, more clarity. Some people around you don't understand. But you could have more. Yes, you could, but you don't want to. Because what fulfills you now can't be bought. You start to notice that beauty lies in simple things. A warm cup of coffee, a corner of the house with natural light, an old blanket full of stories. Luxury now is free time. Luxury is not needing to be seen. Luxury is being invisible to the eyes of the world, yet whole within yourself. You understand that everything consumption once promised no longer serves. Because a soul in its final life is no longer seeking adornments. It seeks space to breathe. And in this process, something new is born. Gratitude. For everything that stays. And for everything that goes. You feel that owning less makes you more whole. That the emptiness around you creates room for fullness within. All you need is a light backpack to walk through the end. There is a quiet, yet profound moment when the soul simply can no longer sustain what is false. Not out of rebellion, but out of exhaustion. Pretending to be excited. Pretending to agree. Pretending to care. Pretending everything is fine when it clearly isn't. The mask begins to weigh heavy. And little by little, it falls. If you once tolerated social conventions out of politeness, now they hurt. Forced smiles, empty compliments, roles that no longer represent who you are, all of it becomes unbearable. You start noticing yourself responding more honestly, saying no more easily, distancing yourself from environments where you have to adapt too much. And even if that comes with losses, you feel relief. It's as if Suddenly your soul says, "We don't have time for performances anymore." And this honesty comes at a price. Some people drift away. You might be called difficult, cold, even selfish. But deep down, you're simply being real. Perhaps for the very first time, you begin to value integrity over acceptance. You'd rather be misunderstood than distort yourself. That doesn't mean living in conflict. It means living in alignment with what you feel, with what you think, with what you resonate. The soul, in its final cycle, no longer needs to please in order to exist. It exists on its own, and that is enough. You begin to realize that the most beautiful encounters in life happen when no one is pretending. When we can say, "I don't know. I don't want to. I can't do this anymore." And by doing so, you inspire others to free themselves too. Authenticity becomes the priority. And the strange thing is, even if the world is startled by your honesty, you feel at home for the first time, because there is no more discomfort in being who you are. The armor has fallen, and what remains is a naked soul, calm, present, and at peace. To be yourself in a world that is constantly trying to make you something else is the greatest accomplishment. Ralph Waldo Emerson. Have you ever felt that time slowed down? Not clock time, that one keeps ticking, but the time within you, that subtle anxiety to rush, to arrive, to solve, simply dissolves. You still have plans. You may even keep goals, dreams, ambitions, but they're no longer accompanied by anguish. It's as if the inner drive of urgency has been replaced by a deeper understanding. I'm already where I'm meant to be. The soul, when nearing the end of its cycle, no longer rushes. It no longer needs to prove it is capable. It no longer needs to chase something that, deep down, it knows was never outside of itself. You begin to realize that some things don't need to be forced, that what is meant for you will come, not through relentless effort, but through resonance. It's the gentle abandonment of the race mentality, the awareness that life is not a path to be rushed through, but a field to be felt with presence. You start to honor life's rhythms. You respect your pauses. You no longer feel guilty for resting. And you don't rush to start again. Often, this confuses others. Aren't you afraid of being left behind? And the answer comes without hesitation. Behind what? Because you've understood that there's no place you need to reach. Arrival is now. And that changes everything. Mornings begin without the burden of conquering the day. Decisions come with more calm. Even mistakes feel less dramatic, because you realize you're no longer here to accumulate experiences, but to say goodbye with awareness. This absence of urgency is, perhaps, one of the greatest signs of a soul at peace. It's the end of time as the enemy and the beginning of time as sacred space. You no longer measure your life by productivity. You measure it by presence. And in that, there is immense freedom, because there is no more inner pressure, only the silence of someone who knows, I have already been, now I simply am. Nature does not hurry, yet everything is accomplished. Lao Tzu. At the beginning of the journey, silence can feel empty, even frightening, as if it reveals what the noise has always hidden. But when the soul nears the end of its cycle, silence stops being absence and becomes pure presence. You begin to seek it not as an escape, but as a joy. It's not loneliness, it's solitude. The world outside remains noisy, notifications, opinions, stimuli. But within you, a nearly sacred desire to withdraw is born. And you realize that the truest moments of your life are those when you're at peace with nothingness, with no need to explain, justify, or perform. Just you, your breath, and the space between one thought and another. It is there, in that interval, that the soul rests. There, it remembers who it is. You begin to choose more carefully the places you go, the conversations you allow, the voices you listen to. Not because you're isolating yourself from the world, but because you're reconnecting with your essence. Silence becomes a portal. Within it, you hear your own feelings more clearly. You understand life's subtext. You pick up on the signs that once went unnoticed. And perhaps the most magical thing, you begin to attract people who also honor silence. Relationships where comfort doesn't depend on what is said, but on what is felt in simply being together. Your home changes. You start to care for the sounds, the light, the energy. You create sanctuaries, spaces where the heart can rest without being asked for answers. The noise of the world still exists, but it no longer enters you, because you've built, inside yourself, a garden of silence. And in that garden you bloom. In silence, all the answers rest. Ram Dass. At the beginning of the journey, silence can feel empty, even frightening, as if it reveals what noise was hiding all along. But when the soul begins to near the end of its cycle, silence is no longer absence. It becomes pure presence. You begin to seek it not out of escape, but out of pleasure. It's not loneliness. It's solitude. The outside world remains noisy, notifications, opinions, endless stimuli. But inside you, a sacred longing to retreat begins to bloom. And you realize that the truest moments of your life are those when you are at peace with nothingness. No need to explain, justify, or perform. Just you, your breath, and the space between one thought and the next. It is there, in that interval, that the soul finds rest. There, it remembers who it is. You begin to choose more carefully the places you go, the conversations you engage in, the voices you allow in, not because you're isolating from the world, but because you're reconnecting with your essence. Silence becomes a portal. Within it, you hear your own feelings more clearly. You understand the subtleties of life. You catch the signs that once went unnoticed. And perhaps most magically, you begin to attract others who also honor silence. Relationships where comfort doesn't depend on words, but on what is felt in simply being together. Your home begins to change. You start caring for the sounds, the light, the energy. You create sanctuaries, spaces where the heart can rest without being asked for answers. The noise of the world still exists, but it no longer enters you, because within, you've built a garden of silence. And in that garden you bloom. In silence, all the answers rest. Ram Dass. Sometimes, we believe we're the ones ending the cycles. But when the soul is about to complete its journey, it's the universe itself that begins to close the doors, gently, precisely. People drift away. Projects lose their meaning. Bonds that once felt eternal simply dissolve, without pain, without drama. And you don't resist. You don't force things to stay. You don't chase after anything, because you feel, with a quiet certainty, what needs to stay stays. The rest moves on. It's a different kind of farewell. Not an ending filled with tears, but an ending filled with gratitude. You realize you no longer need to belong to anything. You no longer need to force roots where the soil isn't calling. It's no longer about building something lasting, but about letting go of what has already served its purpose. If before you were seeking new beginnings, now you honor the endings. And there's beauty in that. because everything that ends in peace becomes a blessing. Some relationships simply fade away. Some paths become too narrow for the soul that has expanded. And that's okay. You feel yourself emptying, but not in a sorrowful way. It's like a river returning to the sea, like leaves falling in autumn, not out of weakness, but because their time has come. This emptiness, this lightness, is a sign that your soul is no longer interested in clinging. It no longer seeks to repeat experiences. It wants to flow, to observe, to align with the natural rhythm of existence. And even if, on the outside, it seems like you're losing, deep down you know, you're being set free. You begin to walk with more detachment. You look at everything with a gaze of, thank you, and see you soon. And you understand that true endings aren't ruptures. They're gentle returns to the silence from which we came. Everything that leaves only takes what no longer belongs to you. Maybe you've recognized yourself in many of the signs we've explored so far. And maybe you're asking yourself, but why is all this happening? Why is this change so quiet, so internal? The answer may not lie in words, but in a feeling. This shift isn't the result of emotional fatigue, nor disillusionment with the world. It's a reflection of something much more subtle, the integration of the soul. When the soul is walking through its final experiences on earth, it no longer seeks to collect more moments. It wants to assimilate what has already been lived. It's like reaching the end of a book and feeling no need to reread the chapters. Not because they lack value, but because they've already been understood. Every sign that appears, detachment, the search for silence, the absence of urgency, is an echo of this process of integration. It's not exhaustion. It's completion. You are not tired of life. You are at peace with it. It's important to distinguish that, because from the outside, this serenity might be mistaken for apathy. But inside, it's the opposite. There is a state of presence so deep that nothing more is needed. The soul has already seen the world from every angle. It has been both the oppressor and the victim. It has lost and been lost. It has had and been stripped of everything. And now, it remembers itself. It starts to sense it no longer needs to learn through suffering. It no longer needs to repeat the same patterns, relationships, or battles. And everything begins to dissolve. Not like someone who is giving up, but like someone who lets go, with respect. This state is sacred. It's like a sunset. You know the night is coming, but there's no rush. Only contemplation. At this stage, the soul no longer seeks outer experiences. It seeks inner freedom. It no longer wants to control. It no longer wants to convince. It no longer wants to impress. All it longs for is to go home. And home, in this case, is not a physical place. It's a state of consciousness. It's the return to the whole, to the one, to the primordial silence from which everything came. And this begins to show itself in simple ways. You care less about what others think. You feel less need to join the social races. You accept your days as they are, without demanding that they be extraordinary. The deepest part of it all is that you can't quite explain what you're feeling, but you know it's real. You sense that something is coming to completion. And for the first time, you don't need to do anything to make it happen. Just allow it. It's like a fruit ripening and falling. There is no pain, only surrender. These signs are not symptoms of escape. They are markers of crossing. Soft beacons saying, "You've already learned. Now just be." The end of seeking is the beginning of being. Eckhart Tolle. This may be one of the oldest questions known to humanity, and also one of the most intimate. What happens after? after the last breath, after the final gaze, after the final cycle. When we feel we may be living our last incarnation, it's only natural for this question to arise. But more than curiosity, what emerges is a sense of return. Not a physical return, but a return to something we may never have truly left. Many spiritual traditions around the world have tried to name this state, each with its own language, its own poetry, its own vision of eternity. In Hinduism, they speak of moksha, the liberation from the cycle of births and deaths, not as an escape, but as an awakening, the being dissolving into the whole, free from desires, free from karma. In Buddhism, there are the bodhisattvas, souls who have reached enlightenment but choose to return out of compassion to help others awaken too. Perhaps you feel this, a calling not to do more, but to serve in silence, with presence, by example. Other traditions speak of returning to universal consciousness, a state of unity where the I is no longer needed. No more story, no more name, no more form. Only essence. And there are those who say that after the last life, there is only silence. But not a dark or lonely silence. A full silence, like the womb of the universe, like the moment before the first sound. Maybe it's not about where we go, but about what we stop being. We stop being names. We stop being memories. We stop being bodies. And we return to what we were before the first memory. Pure consciousness. This need not be feared. On the contrary, it may be the sweetest state that exists. Because if you are living your last life, it is not a sign of ending. It is a sign of wholeness. Like a river that has run through mountains, rocks, and plains, and now meets the sea. It does not disappear. It expands. And maybe deep down, this is what we're all truly seeking. Not another life, but to become the ocean once again. Whatever vision most resonates with your soul, one truth is shared across them all. After the last life, there is no more rush, no more pain, no more identity. There is only the whole, and you within it. The drop does not die when it touches the ocean. It becomes the ocean. Take a deep breath. At some point along this path, you may have asked yourself, so now what? What do I do with all of this? The mind, conditioned by lifetimes of striving, is always looking for a task, a mission, a next step. But if you truly are living your last life, perhaps the greatest teaching is this. You don't need to do anything. There are no more cosmic debts, no final exams, no hidden master waiting for your last lesson. Everything that needed to be learned has already been learned. Everything that needed to be felt has already been felt. Now, the calling is different. It is the call of presence. To be, to feel, to give thanks, and to allow yourself to simply exist without effort. The soul in its final lifetime is like a candle that has already lit many paths, and now only wishes to burn gently until its flame joins the greater light. Of course, the world will keep trying to pull you in. It will tell you that you need to improve, rush, win, accumulate. But something inside you no longer resonates with that. And there is nothing wrong with it. This is not lack of motivation. It is wisdom. You realize you no longer need to search for purpose as if chasing a medal. Your purpose now is to be at peace. And in doing so, you inspire without trying. You transform without touching. You heal without speaking. Maybe you are like an old tree, no longer needing to grow upward. Now you simply offer shade. This state is not passivity, but conscious surrender. It is the release of effort that comes from fear. and the loving acceptance that life has already been fulfilled. It doesn't mean you'll never feel again, but now everything you feel comes with more space and less attachment. You become a witness to your own journey, with love, with lightness, with gratitude. And if at any moment the mind starts to push again, just breathe and say, I have already arrived. Because the last life doesn't demand rushing. It invites a quiet farewell. You didn't come here to hurry. You came to remember. If you've made it this far, in silence, feeling each word like a mirror, maybe your soul is whispering something your mind doesn't yet know how to name. Maybe you're no longer here to conquer, to compete, to prove. Maybe you're here to say goodbye with gratitude. And what a beautiful farewell that can be, when there is no guilt, no rush, no regret. Only the recognition that everything had its time, that everything made sense, even what hurt. You begin to realize that life no longer needs to be a ladder. It can be a field, and you can finally lie down in it, look up at the sky, and say, thank you, Earth. I have lived enough. If the signs we explored here resonated within you, if you recognized yourself in the silence, the detachment, the absence of urgency, maybe it's because your soul already remembers where it came from. And now all that remains is to live lightly. Lightness in your gaze, lightness in your choices, lightness in saying yes, and lightness especially in saying no. This may very well be your last life, but that is not an ending. It is a crowning, the final blooming of a soul that has learned to love without asking for anything in return. So live what's left with kindness. Walk slowly, hug more, smile with your eyes, and when you can, choose peace, even if no one understands, especially when no one understands. If this message spoke to your soul, comment at peace, not out of obligation, but as a small gesture from someone who, even without being able to explain it all, felt it. Because deep down, this is the language of old souls. They don't need to understand. They only need to remember. And when I go, let it be light. Let it be whole. Let it be mine.